The envelope was still on the kitchen counter when I got home from the hospital. Not a card, not flowers, not even a text that said, "I'm sorry, I'm coming." Just a plain white envelope with my name on it in his handwriting, and inside, a single folded note that said, "You need rest. Your mom can help more than I can right now. I'll be in touch." I had just lost the baby at 19 weeks. I stood in the kitchen in the clothes I'd worn to the hospital the day before, reading that note 3 times, and I did not cry. I don't know why. Maybe my body had already used everything it had on the table in that procedure room. Maybe I just knew, somewhere quiet and certain, that this was not a surprise. My husband and I had been married for 2 years. We'd been trying for 8 months. When I finally got pregnant, he was the one who cried. Happy tears, he said, both hands on my face in the parking lot of the OB's office. I believed him. I believed all of it. What I didn't understand then was that he loved the idea of a family the way some people love the idea of running a marathon. It sounds meaningful. It feels important when you sign up. But when the training gets hard, when your knees hurt and it's raining and you're nowhere near the finish line, a lot of people just quietly stop showing up. He stopped showing up around month 4 when the pregnancy got complicated. Low progesterone, bed rest, canceled trips and dinner plans and all the things that made our life feel light and easy. He started working late, then later. I told myself it was stress. I told myself everyone handles fear differently. He wasn't afraid. He was inconvenienced. I called my mom that night, not to cry on the phone, just to hear her voice. She drove 3 hours without me asking and was at my door by 9 o'clock with a bag of groceries and the specific kind of quiet that only mothers carry. She didn't say anything when she saw the envelope on the counter. She just put it in the trash, washed her hands, and started making soup. I let her. My husband came by 2 days later to pick up some things. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, his bedroom too, technically, though I hadn't felt that way in months. And he said he thought we both needed space to grieve, that he wasn't handling it well, that he needed time to figure out who he was in all of this. I remember looking at him and thinking, "You don't look like someone who is grieving." He looked relieved. He moved into his brother's place in Phoenix. We didn't divorce right away. He kept saying he needed time, and I kept letting him have it, not because I believed in us anymore, but because I was 31 years old and I had just lost a pregnancy and I did not have the energy to also dismantle a marriage. Some survivals are just about getting through the week. So I got through the weeks. My mom stayed for a month. When she left, I went back to work. I'm a hospital administrator, mostly back-end operations, nothing patient-facing, and I threw myself into the part of my brain that likes systems and structure and problems that have actual solutions. My personal life was a wreck. My professional life I could control. About 8 months after the miscarriage, I got a call from an attorney I didn't recognize. He introduced himself and said he was reaching out on behalf of a client, my father-in-law, who was looking to bring on a healthcare operations consultant for a private matter. I knew my father-in-law ran a small network of elder care facilities across the Southwest. I had met him maybe 5 times total. He was a formal man, not unfriendly, but contained, the kind of person who shook hands firmly and remembered your name, but never asked you anything personal. My husband didn't talk about him much. I always got the impression there had been a falling out years back that neither of them had ever named directly. I almost said no. I said yes because the project was genuinely interesting. He was trying to restructure the governance of 2 facilities that were underperforming, and it overlapped almost exactly with work I'd done at my own job. And also because I was 8 months out from the worst thing that had ever happened to me and I needed something to absorb. We met at his office in Scottsdale. I wore a blazer. I brought a folder. He looked at me across a wide desk and said, "You're sharper than I expected." I said, "What did you expect?" He almost smiled. "My son's wife," he said, and I understood completely what he meant. We worked together for 3 months on the consulting project. I learned quickly that he was not a warm person in the conventional sense. He didn't make small talk, he didn't do lunches. He communicated almost entirely in bullet points. But he was fair, and he was honest in a way that I had stopped expecting from people. If something I suggested was wrong, he said so. If it was right, he said that too. After a lifetime of men who softened everything into ambiguity, I found it almost startling. Around month 2, he asked me, not unkindly, what my plans were. I knew he meant the marriage. Word had apparently gotten around. I told him I didn't have plans yet, that I was still figuring it out. He nodded and said, "The facilities need someone like you long-term, someone with actual operational sense and no ego about it. If you ever want a full-time role, the offer stands." I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no. Here's what I want to be clear about, because I know how this sounds. I was not thinking about inheritance. I was not thinking about the family money or what it might mean for me later. I am not saying I was a saint. I knew abstractly that my father-in-law was comfortable in the way that old Southwest real estate money makes people comfortable. But I was not running a strategy. I was a 31-year-old woman with a failing marriage and a lost pregnancy and a job offer from a man who thought I was competent, and I took it because it was the only thing in my life that made sense. I joined full-time 6 months later. By then, the separation was official. My husband had filed. We hadn't spoken in 4 months. Not a real conversation, just logistics through attorneys. And I had stopped checking my phone for his name. That particular wound had closed, not healed exactly, but closed. Scar tissue not open. My father-in-law and I fell into a rhythm. I managed operations across 3 facilities. He ran the financial and legal side. We had standing meetings every Tuesday and Thursday that were always exactly 45 minutes. I started anticipating his notes before he sent them. He started sending fewer. One afternoon, about a year in, he kept me after a meeting. Everyone else had gone, and said he wanted to talk about something personal. I waited. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at me and said, "I know what my son is. I've known for a long time. I need you to understand that my respect for you is entirely separate from that." I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I just said thank you. He said, "I'm telling you because I'm going to start transitioning some things, and I want you in those conversations." I nodded. I walked to my car and sat there for 10 minutes before I drove home. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in March, 22 months after he left the note on the counter. I didn't go to court. My attorney handled it, and I found out it was done because she texted me the word finalized at 11:14 in the morning while I was in a budget meeting. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a minute. I thought I would feel something sharp. Mostly I just felt tired, and then I felt something that wasn't quite relief but was its neighbor. I went back to the meeting. The following year was the hardest at work, not because of anything emotional, but because 2 of the facilities went through state audits simultaneously, and I basically lived at the office for 4 months, and it was also, strangely, the most stable I had felt in years. I knew what I was doing. I knew why it mattered. I was good at it. My father-in-law's health had been slowly declining since I'd known him. He had a heart condition he managed carefully, and around the 3rd year it became less manageable. He didn't talk about it directly, but I could see it in the way the Tuesday meetings started running shorter, the way he moved more deliberately, the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence in a way he never used to. He updated his estate documents. I know because his attorney, who had become something like a neutral party I trusted, told me, not the specifics, just that it had been done and that I should be aware changes had been made that affected the company structure. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want details. What I wanted, and I spent a long time making sure this was true, was for him to be all right. He was not a man who had made everything easy. He had his own failures, his own coldness, his own history of choosing distance when closeness was needed. But he had chosen to trust me, and I had not wasted it, and somewhere in that exchange something real had grown. Not father and daughter, not exactly. Something else. Something you don't quite have a word for when it happens late and unexpected and slightly sideways from everything you thought your life would look like. My ex-husband came back in October. I found out he was in town because my former sister-in-law, a woman I'd stayed loosely in touch with, not out of obligation but because I genuinely liked her, sent me a text that said only, "Heads up." I appreciated that. I'd had 3 years to prepare for this eventually, and I still stood in my kitchen rereading that text for longer than I should have. He called the next day. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes long, which told me everything. 4-minute voicemails are not logistics, they are performances. I listened to it once. He said he'd done a lot of work on himself, that he'd been in therapy, that he thought about the miscarriage and what it had done to us. To us, he said, as if grief had been something we'd carried together, and that he wanted to talk. Not to get back together, he said, just to talk. I didn't call back. He showed up at the office. Not my father-in-law's office. He wouldn't have known where that was. My old office, the hospital system I used to work for, where apparently he'd told the front desk he was my husband. The woman who texted me about it used that word with quotation marks, husband. I appreciated that too. I had my attorney send him a letter. Not threatening, not dramatic, just clear, contact through counsel only. What happened next I only know partly from being there and partly from what the attorney told me afterward. My ex-husband apparently had been calling his father. Not regularly. They hadn't had a real relationship in years, but calling. Chatty calls, the attorney said. Interested calls. My father-in-law had not told me about them, which at first hurt a little, and then I understood. He was watching. He was measuring. He had spent a lifetime building something, and he was deciding very carefully who was who. The confrontation, I'm going to call it that because that's what it was, happened at the main facility in Scottsdale on a Tuesday afternoon. My ex-husband arrived without notice. I was in a meeting. He told the front desk he was there to see his father. No one stopped him because no one knew his name was on old paperwork, technically still listed in some places as next of kin, and facilities like this run on protocol gaps. He walked into his father's office. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that 10 minutes later, the facility director came to my meeting room and said my presence was needed. And when I walked down the hall and opened the door, I found my ex-husband standing in the middle of the room looking at a wall of binders with his father's name on them. Operational records, board documents, letters of intent, and his father seated behind the desk looking at him the way you look at a math problem that has already been solved. My ex-husband looked at me when I walked in. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, more like the specific humiliation of someone who planned for a negotiation and walked into a verdict instead. His father said very quietly, "She has been here, you have not." That was all. My ex-husband left about 15 minutes later. I don't know what he said on the way out. I was in the hallway outside the office, leaning against the wall, and I heard the front door open, and then I heard his car in the parking lot, and then I heard nothing. The attorney called me a week later. I won't go into the full details because they're complicated and also because they're private, but the general shape of it was this. The restructuring my father-in-law had done meant that operational governance of the facilities passed through a trust with a board, and I had been named to that board. My ex-husband had not. There were provisions, there were documents. There was a letter written in my father-in-law's very precise handwriting that said, among other things, that he had watched me build something from a point of genuine loss, and that this was the quality he had spent his whole life trying to find in the people around him and finding mostly absent. He passed away 4 months later, quietly in the facility he built from nothing, on a Tuesday morning. I was there. The grief was real. I want to say that plainly because I think some people will assume it wasn't. Will assume this whole story is a calculation, a long game, a woman who saw an angle and played it. I understand why. The facts, laid out without interiority, do look like strategy. But grief doesn't announce itself politely. It doesn't arrive with context. It just shows up, sometimes while you're standing in a beige hallway under fluorescent lights in a building full of other people's paperwork, and it takes everything you have just to stay standing. I stayed standing. My ex-husband contested portions of the estate. His attorneys were aggressive and expensive, and it lasted 14 months. Mine were better. Not because I had planned for this. I hadn't, not specifically, but because when you spend 3 years doing actual work instead of waiting for a harvest, you tend to end up with more to show for it. The case settled. I still run the facilities, 3 now with a fourth in development. I have a team of 11 people who are excellent at their jobs, and every Tuesday I sit in the meeting my father-in-law designed and I try to run it in 45 minutes because that is the one thing I have kept exactly the same. I turned 36 last spring. My mom came out for the weekend. We had dinner at a place she chose, which means it was Italian and slightly too loud and entirely perfect. At some point in the evening she said, quietly and without ceremony, that she was proud of me. I didn't tell her that was all I'd needed from the very beginning. I didn't have to, she already knew. I think about that Tuesday afternoon a lot. Not the dramatic parts, not him standing in the middle of that office, not the look on his face when he understood what he had walked into. I think about the 45-minute meetings. I think about showing up, week after week, to a job that asked everything of me when I had very little left to give, and giving it anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you about rebuilding after a loss. It's not a montage. It doesn't feel heroic while it's happening. It just feels like Tuesday, like another budget report, another audit, another drive home in the dark, wondering if you made the right call. The work doesn't announce itself as meaningful. You find out later, sometimes much later, that it was. My ex-husband left because things got hard and he had never actually decided, not in the deep-down way that counts, what kind of person he wanted to be when hard things happened. That's not a judgment, it's just what I saw. Some people reach a difficult moment, and they discover a version of themselves they didn't know was there, and some people reach a difficult moment, and they leave a note on the counter. I am not without fault in any of this. I was not always easy to be with. I had my own walls, my own blind spots. But I made a choice, at the lowest point I had ever been, to do something useful with what was left of me. Not because I had a plan. Not because I had a plan. Not because I saw some future where it all worked out. Just because showing up was the only thing I knew how to do that didn't make me feel worse. My father-in-law saw that, and what I understood, eventually, was that he recognized it because it was the same thing he had done his whole life. Worked with honesty, demanded honesty from others, and found almost no one who could meet him there without an agenda. He was not a warm man. He was a fair one. In my experience, fair is rarer and more valuable. There is a version of this story where I look calculating, where the arc of it, woman loses marriage, builds relationship with wealthy father-in-law, ends up on the board of his company, reads like something I engineered. I understand that version, but the thing about doing the right thing, for the right reasons, over a long enough period of time is that the results tend to be coherent with the effort. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough that it stops feeling like luck and starts feeling like cause and effect. You can't fake competence for 5 years. You can't pretend to care about the work that long without the work knowing. My father-in-law knew. He had spent decades watching people perform their way through rooms, and he had a precise, unhurried way of waiting until the performance ran out of material. I didn't have a performance. I had a miscarriage and a failed marriage and a job offer that arrived at exactly the right moment, and I took it and I did not stop. That's the whole story. The rest is just paperwork.